The first thing that needs to be said about this year's Kentucky Derby is that it has the deepest, most competitive field since we started doing these seminars. Half the field has already run a Thoro-Graph figure of 1 or better, which is faster than I'll Have Another ran to win this race in 2012. 6 horses have already run negative numbers, faster than California Chrome ran to win 2 years later. What this means is that it will take a big figure to win, and with a highly competitive 20-horse field, a good trip as well. The riders will play a bigger part than usual in the outcome of this one. In the tables that follow, the top is defined as more than 1 point faster than the previous top. A pair is defined as within 1 point either way of the previous top. An off race is more than 1 point through 4 points worse than the previous top. And an X is more than 4 points worse. As we point out every year at this time, when it comes to prep races for the Derby, less is more. Those coming in with just 2 preps have run better than those with 3, which have run better than those with 4 or more. And trainers have noticed and adjusted, which has resulted in a slight increase in the number of horses that run new tops in the Derby to about 2 a year. But it's still worth noting that about 2/3 of Derby starters run worse than their previous best. As far as patterns go, the best has been to come into the race following a pair of tops. Second best has been coming in off a top as long as it wasn't too big a top. The rest of the patterns have been pretty dismal, including those that just ran a big new top. Finally, there is the question of development from 2 to 3 and how that affects how they run in the Derby. The upshot is more development makes it less likely they will run a new top, especially when you get out past 4 points better than their 2-year-old top. And the chances of a horse running an X goes way up to more than 50%. Audible has been moving forward since November, a chunk at a time, and his last could be good enough to win with the right trip. Pluses are that he's only started twice this year, is fast enough to win, hasn't bounced yet, and Castellano could well be worth a point or 2 in ground saved in a 20-horse field. The possible negatives are that he's already developed 5 points from his 2-year-old top, and he doesn't really have a distance pedigree, especially on the dam side. Bolt d'Oro was a great 2-year-old, running a huge one in his 3rd start and better than it looked in the Breeders' Cup, where he was wide. He has a preferred 2 starts this year, and they were good, but not back to his top, and now it's his 3rd start again. On his best, this one is clearly a contender, and he definitely has a distance pedigree. The rider switch here could be important. It's not that Espinosa is bad. He's just not Castellano. Bravazzo was hurt by his top in October and didn't break through that level until the Risen Star. That one set him back again, and even if he was fast enough, it's probably too soon for a big effort. Combatant has a very sound pattern, but isn't competitive on number power, and with 4 starts this year and just 3 weeks rest, is unlikely to make a big jump. Enticed was decent as a 2-year-old, and we don't hold the bad one over the winter against him because of the north-south ship. He jumped way forward in the Gotham and ran almost as well in the Wood. He's a borderline fit here on number power, and he has all the pedigree in the world. But given the 5 points of development, there's a good chance those last 2 are maximum efforts, at least for now. And the cumulative effects of them may have taken something out of him. Also note, McLaughlin does not do as well at Churchill. We'll look for this one later. Firenze Fire has nothing but negatives. He's not that fast on his best. He hasn't gotten close to his top in his last 3, and he'll be making his 5th start of the campaign. This one hitting the board would be a major surprise. Flame Away was slow last year, but has come a long way to pair tops in his last 2. With 7 points of development and 4 starts this year, another jump is unlikely, and we would not be surprised if this one ended up being a grass horse. Free Drop Billy had a nice pattern with decent figures going into the Breeders' Cup, where he caught a dead rail. He ran a new top in his seasonal debut, bounced a little, then broke through with a better top last time after adjusting for a wide trip. It wasn't a big jump, and this is an interesting pattern. It's possible we could see another forward move now, which might get him into the exotics. Good Magic had a strong 2-year-old campaign, 2 starts this year, a small forward move in his last to a top that puts him in this, and is trained by Chad Brown. Oh, wait, that was Practical Joke, whom we loved in this race last year. Well, you can see why we were confused. The only real differences are that Good Magic had a slightly better 2-year-old top, which means his current top represents a little less development. And his pedigree is a little more plus distance, and a little more late developing. All of which makes us like him even more than Practical Joke. But the caveat here is this is a way tougher field than last year's. Good Magic is the most likely horse in a race to run well, and is very strong for the exotics, but is just one of several horses that can win this Derby. Hofburg ran once as a 2-year-old in a sprint for a guy who doesn't wind up his young horses first time out, so we pay no attention to that figure at all. His maiden win in Florida was good, and his last was a nice forward move. This colt comes into this a couple of points too slow, but he's lightly raced with a good pattern and 5 weeks rest. And Mott is not a guy who usually suffers from Derby fever. Hofburg is a borderline contender here and definitely one to watch down the line. Instilled Regard is too slow here, and if he was getting ready to make a jump, his last would probably have been better. Justify earned a very big figure in his debut, then won not as good on 3 weeks rest when stretched out, though he probably could have run faster that day. With 4 weeks rest into the Santa Anita Derby, he broke through with his best yet. If he runs that well again, he has a good shot, and if he goes forward, an even better one. And of course, Baffert's runners have done a lot better than most in the Derby, though the ones that were coming off a new top haven't run quite as well. But there are some issues here, in that he is coming off a new top, drifted in and out while running it, and will be making his 4 starts since mid-February. And when you do the math, even Baffert has had significantly more horses run an off-race or an X than a pair or a new top. We're not crazy enough to dismiss this horse, but at a short price, he's an underlay in a very competitive race. Lone Sailor ran a good one at Saratoga last year before tailing off. We can excuse the non-effort when they tried blinkers in January, and he has moved forward nicely since. He's still far too slow, but we do note his sheet does look a little like Mine That Bird's, and Amos has been moving horses up like crazy. Magnum Moon, like Justified, didn't run a 2, then came out running this year. But he hasn't really gone forward from that first one, and we don't like his last. We don't like that it was a backward move or that he bore out in the stretch. He's also had 4 preps, has only 3 weeks rest, and fits only marginally on number power. He's not for us. Mendelson has obviously got the relatives, especially on his dam side. He got much better when blinkers were added last fall, then won the juvenile turf despite backing up a couple of points. His first start this year was a new top, and then, in his first try on dirt, he went absolutely nuts. If he runs back to that race, Mendelson will almost certainly win this, and if he backs up a couple of points, he still might. But obviously, it was a 10-point new top, and it having come in his first try on dirt may or may not make a difference as to whether or how much it knocks him out. It's worth noting that of the others who came into the Derby having run a -2 or better as a 3-year-old, most went back at least 4 points. Those who at least paired up were Big Brown, Orb, and Frosted, and Smarty Jones won despite running a couple of points off his top. But here's a little more food for thought. This is not the typical horse coming from the desert, and not just because he's a lot faster. It's a small sample, but the ones O'Brien has started in the Derby have usually run their race, whatever that level may have been. We have no idea what Mendelson will do off this pattern, but he's the fastest horse, and he won't be the favorite. My Boy Jack ran his top in his last 3 starts, but he's already developed 6 points from his 2-year-old top, and with 4 starts this year and only 3 weeks rest, it's unlikely he will make the jump he needs to contend. Noble Indy ran big first time out in December when Ford going 2 turns second out, and at that point looked enough like a Derby contender that we bet him in the futures. In the Risen Star, he acted up pre-race and didn't fire. After that, he ran better to win the Louisiana Derby, but he hasn't gone forward since early January or even gotten back to his top. Pletcher has brought horses into the Derby with some weird patterns the last couple of years, and we have no idea what to do with this one. But he does start out a couple of points too slow, and Pletcher hasn't gotten too many new tops in the Derby. Promise was fulfilled at a flat pattern as a 2-year-old, then jumped to a big new top to win the Fountain of Youth. His stinker in the Florida Derby can be attributed both to a dead rail and an insane pace. But even if he got back to his top now, at 1.25 miles, it won't be enough against this tough field. Salamini ran big in his second start behind Bolt d'Oro and was second again in the Breeders' Cup despite bouncing. It has taken his colt a long time to get back to his top, which is not good, and he still has about 3 points to make up. Vino Rosso ran a good one first time out, but then ran 3 times without getting back to that level. In his last, he finally broke through with a huge new top that would make him a serious contender if he can repeat it. But this is an ugly pattern, and we would play him to bounce to the sky, except Always Dreaming, who had an even uglier line. He also hadn't gotten back to his 2-year-old top until he broke through with a huge new top in his last Derby prep. We are certainly not going to count on Vino Rosso to run well, but he makes us nervous. Blended Citizen did a lot of developing to get to a new top in his last, and is still way too slow. We're going to divide the Derby field into 5 groups this year. The E group contains 3 horses that have no redeeming features, at least against this field: Bravazzo, Firenze Fire, and Instilled Regard. If Blended Citizen draws in, he also goes here. The D group has horses better than the E group, but not good enough for us to use, even underneath. These are Combatant, Flame Away, Lone Sailor, Promises Fulfilled, and Salamini. The C group has horses that are faster, but either not fast enough or with patterns we don't like. Most important of these is the undefeated Magnum Moon, along with My Boy Jack and Noble Indy. In other years, they would all be good enough to get into the B group, but not this year. This year's B group has 4 horses. Entice and Vino Rosso are here because although we don't really like their patterns, they've already run races that could get them a piece of this. Free Drop Billy and Hofberg are here for the opposite reason. They're in range on number power with strong patterns that could yield a new top. We have 5 horses in the A group this year, which we think is the most we have ever had. Audible, Bolt d'Oro, Good Magic, Justify, and Mendelson are very strong, and they could likely will take a negative figure not just to win, but to hit the trifecta. The fastest horse is Mendelson. The most likely to run well is Good Magic, but not one of these would be a surprise to see in the winner's circle. The bottom line for the Derby is that amazingly, not a single A horse is hurt by the draw, making it extremely likely that a winner will come from that group. At this point in his career, Velasquez doesn't try that hard to save ground, and with Vino Rosso drawn out in the parking lot, we're willing to throw him out. Ryan Moore, on the other hand, is extremely conscious of saving ground, and our guess is Mendelson won't be outside of more than 1 around the first turn. Other than Vino Rosso, the rest of the B horses drew well enough to use underneath in tries and supers. And while it's not easy to pick the winner in this race, we don't have to use the C's, D's, and E's at all, which means that including Vino Rosso, there are 12 horses, or 60% of the field, that we can throw out of the superfectas. We're not going to try to pick a winner in this year's Derby. Instead, we're going to say there's a very good exotic key and only a limited number of horses that have to be used with him, and some of those just underneath. Chad Brown tells his riders to save ground, and with a good draw on Jose Ortiz, it's highly likely that a Good Magic will both run well and get a good trip. which makes him very likely to get into the exotics at about 10 to 1 or so.